For a normal person, you get to the point where you're having consequences for something and you decide, I don't want these consequences, and you go back to normal drinking. People that develop more significant disorders, they get to that point, but then they continue using. Hi everybody, Dr. Tom Britton. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of American Addiction Centers and a person in long-term recovery. The topic today is going to be alcohol use disorders and treatment. And also, if you like what you hear, make sure to subscribe to the channel. We're always adding new content, and you can get on at any point and hear what we're doing. Please check out our helpful links if you're interested in getting treatment for yourself or a loved one, or even if you just want to learn more about addiction. Alcohol use disorders are one of the hardest things to recognize. And the reason, it's kind of like food disorders, for example, is people use alcohol, they use food, they have sex in healthy ways. We have a healthy relationship to those substances. What happens with alcohol, though, is if I use to a certain point or I use a certain amount, that I start to get into a dangerous category. And so if I think about alcohol abuse, kind of what that means in this country is really that I'm doing something in a harmful or a risky way. So with alcohol abuse, the most common alcohol use disorder in the US is binge drinking. And a huge amount of people in the US binge drink. The way you define it is it's 4 drinks in one sitting for a woman and 5 drinks for a man in one sitting. And so if I do even that behavior, and I do it once a week or once a month or once a year, that's still a very dangerous thing. Half of the deaths from alcohol use come from binge drinking. And so on the other side are people that drink regularly. And alcohol abuse in that category are people really that are doing risky things while drinking. And it could be drinking and driving, it could be putting myself in risky situations, it could be influencing my job, and so forth. So as you think about the risk of binge drinking, and people have asked the question, who is more at risk? Are young people, middle-aged people, older people, et cetera? The bottom line is that anybody who doesn't drink regularly doesn't have a tolerance to alcohol, which means that their bodies are not used to drinking large amounts. And so you hear about alcohol poisonings, for example, and this is somebody who drinks to the point where first they pass out, but body processes alcohol slower. So once I pass out, if I've still been drinking, that my body continues to process that alcohol, and it can literally put me into respiratory distress where I stop breathing or I die. So that's pretty universal for any age group. At any time, I could drink to the point where that happens. I think with younger people that have less experience drinking, they're more at risk of making those kind of mistakes. That I'm 52 years old. If I were at a football game with my friends, or watching it at home or something like that, I drink 7 or 8 beers. I might be really, really drunk. But I get to a point where I kind of have the judgment that probably I should stop. And I think that's one of the ways that we think about this differently. I think that the biggest risk with binge drinking really is drinking and driving. Because if I go to a place and I drink 5 or 6 beers and I'm not used to drinking 5 or 6 beers, I'm going to be really impaired. Blackouts, it's an interesting thing because blackouts simply mean that you don't remember after the fact what happened during the moment. The way that we black out is we drink to a certain point where really memory processing, that we have a part of our brain that takes information, puts it in short-term and then puts it in long-term memory banks. And so that alcohol use is really kind of shut down the brain to a point where we're not transferring it from short to long-term. The level of drunk that I am during that period may not be infinitely more dangerous, but my judgment is significantly impaired during a time. Because anytime I'm drunk enough to black out, I'm also drunk enough to make bad decisions, to do very risky things, to put myself in very risky situations, et cetera. It's a sign, frankly, that if you have ever blacked out, or if you drink to blacking out regularly, without question, you should reach out to somebody and talk about that. Alcohol use and substance use disorders in general, I think about them on a continuum. So, at one end of the continuum is normal use. These are people that drink 2 or 3 drinks, with friends. Maybe they drink a beer after dinner, they drink a glass of wine with dinner, or whatever. That's kind of like the normal drinking. You go all the way to the other end, and these are the people that are dying of late-stage alcohol disease. It could be liver failure, et cetera. Could be cardiac issues, and so forth. The majority of people are kind of in that middle group. And in the lower stage of the middle group are the people that are having impacts on their lives that are bad. Maybe they're drinking and driving, they're having relationship issues, they're spending too much money on alcohol, maybe their performance at work is bad. For a normal person, you get to the point where you're having consequences for something and you decide, I don't want these consequences, and you go back to normal drinking. People that develop more significant disorders, they get to that point, but then they continue using. And this is where the physical dependence really begins to increase, the level of impact in the body continues to increase, and as we continue to use, despite those problems, they get more and more severe. Oh, it's a great question. The easy answer is that alcoholism is caused by using alcohol, and that the longer one uses it, no matter who you are, you will develop a dependence upon the drug. What is unique is within the body that we each have a different kind of level of use that leads to that problem. So if I have a family member, for example, with substance use disorder, my genetic likelihood of developing a problem is a greater risk than somebody who doesn't have that person. So I might be able to use this much and develop a problem, whereas somebody else could use this much before they develop a problem. You've probably seen the stories and met the people that during college they drink tons. And then they get out of college and they drink a beer or two and they're like a normal drinker. That is somebody who presumably had a lower, kind of risk of alcoholism. For other people, they've got a big, big risk of, alcoholism. And some of the vulnerabilities that we have that increase our likelihood, aside from genetics, people that have had trauma in their past, physical trauma, sexual trauma, mental trauma, people that have very low coping skills, for example, that I think all substance use, for what it's worth, is about need fulfillment. Is that if I don't know how to feel comfortable socially, and I drink, and suddenly I feel socially comfortable and I have a great time, it's reinforcing the decision to drink when I go into social environments because I get more comfortable. And so the problem is that works in the beginning. But if I continue using, it stops working, and then I have to use more and more and more, and that's what creates substance use disorders. Drinking alcohol over long-term periods has a really significant threat physically to the body, more so than some other drugs. And part of it is within the liver. The liver is what processes alcohol. And alcohol really is a toxin. It's not a healthy thing for the body. And at lower levels, the liver can successfully, get all the bad stuff out of it, no big deal. It is not designed to use large amounts of alcohol. And so if I use it for long periods or I do binge drinking, I'm going to really damage my liver. But it also influences our circulatory system, our heart health, our stroke risk goes up. There's a lot of physical risk that increase the longer that we use them. But there's also the risk of long-term use that we start to have higher rates of depression, higher rates of anxiety, we have sleep disorders, and then we have kind of the social shame type stuff that we begin to get embarrassed about our drinking, ashamed about our drinking, and that makes us pull out of a lot of the things that we used to do that were healthy. So I might stop going to church, I might stop having certain friend circles, I might not be able to have a significant other, and those are the long-term risks. So long-term drinking is a very complicated threat to our overall wellness. To understand alcohol withdrawal, we need to first understand a little bit about what causes it. So we have receptors in the brain that kind of operate normally. Anytime a substance is put in that's foreign, the body tries to adapt to it. And so with alcohol use, that when we get that drug in our system, we get drunk. And that is our body kind of out of balance. The body's job, the brain's job, is to get back in balance. So it starts to adapt. The longer that we use it, it adapts to that being the new normal. That is why we develop tolerance. So that when our brains get used to that, we have to drink more, and then drink more, and then drink more, et cetera. And so that's really what causes kind of withdrawal to potentially happen. So at a certain point, every time we stop drinking, that becomes the unnormal state, the abnormal state. And the brain starts to say, I want alcohol because that's my normal state. So that's what causes cravings. But it's also what causes withdrawal. And what withdrawal, if you think about any drug, withdrawal is basically the opposite of the feeling the drug creates. So alcohol, it sedates you, makes you feel calm, makes you go to sleep. So when we take it out, it makes us feel anxious. At a certain level, at the more risky levels, that it creates seizures in the body and kills people. So, the first answer I would give about soliciting help for withdrawal is talk to a professional about your drinking to determine really how much risk your drinking poses. If I have binge drinking behavior, for example, I drink 7 or 8 beers once or twice a month, my brain will not have adapted to that in a way that really presents a withdrawal risk. If I'm drinking a certain amount every single day, the likelihood is that my brain is adapted. And asking a professional what's my risk level is really, really important, because if I drink to a certain point, when I stop using, I increase seizure potential in the body. And there's people that stop drinking and have literally, death seizures, that their brain seizes enough that they die. It also can create a sense of disorientation and even hallucinations at a certain level. That's what you've heard of, maybe DTs, delirium tremens. If I've been drinking at the level where my body is physically withdrawing, I need to get help for that withdrawal management. And programs like American Addiction Center and others, that we use medication to safely detox somebody. So if you think about the brain has adapted to alcohol, that we help put something in those receptors to create, in essence, a soft landing. And typically that takes 3 to 7 days, based on how much one has been using. And getting to that point where our brains are adapted to not using substances allows us then to begin really the process work on dealing with the behaviors that led to drinking. And that's the biggest important thing about recovery from substances, is I believe that drinking and any drug use is about need fulfillment. That I drink because it does something for me. If I stop that drug, I need to figure out a different way to fulfill the need, or else I'm more likely to go back to drink. And that's what counseling is about. Just like substance use is on a continuum, that more severe drinking versus lower severe drinking, that treatment is also staged in kind of the same way. So people with really significant physical dependence on alcohol, one would start at a very high level of care where they get medical detox, for their drinking. It steps down into residential treatment where you may still have medication to help you with that, but primarily you start talking with counselors, being in groups with other people with the same problem, and starting to make a plan of, when I leave treatment, how am I going to live my life in a way that I can get to the point where I don't want to drink, I don't need to drink, and I have a healthy and happy life. And that's really the goal of all treatment. And below residential treatment is really intensive outpatient programming. That's where I might go to group counseling daily, 5 days a week, maybe 3 hours, 3 times a week. I might step down to counseling once a week or once every other week. All of that counseling is designed to really teach us how to live in the world without substances. And that's a really hard thing. And a lot of people also go to 12-step support groups to kind of complement that. And what the research shows is those that get traditional treatment, like American Addiction Centers, and support from 12-step groups, whatever they are, those outcomes are better than anything separately.
If you or a loved one is struggling with a substance abuse issue, help is available. There are helpful links and a phone number in the description below that can direct you to resources and people that can provide answers 24/7. It's free and always confidential.